All right, so where we left off is we blocked this guy out on Maya. We have kind of a high poly pass here, so we've gone pretty dense on this. One of the areas I could probably convert really quick here is the body. The reason why I like converting in here is sometimes applications like ZBrush, they do kind of a different approach to subdivision. So usually I like to at least convert one level inside of Maya before heading over there, and that way I can use whatever approach I want. But I'll go ahead and do that real quick here. I'll just do a modify, convert, smooth mesh preview to polygons. On this, probably repeat that on the belt, on the pants here, on the arms. And we'll go ahead and prep this guy to go out to ZBrush. Now, before I do that, let's just clean up our scene. Make sure you have all the items here for your character. I'm just going to highlight him and hit Shift-P a couple times. Delete the history on these, freeze transforms, and then we can just Control-G to kind of group these. And we can assume pretty much everything else in here can go, with the exception of maybe the axe here. We want to keep that, and we probably want to bring that over. So let's go ahead and look through this here. All of this stuff I think we can get rid of, and then when it comes to the axe, we have an axe low and an axe high. Ultimately, we're probably going to want to take the axe high over and match detail in our sculpting file. We will be kind of separating things and organizing things in ZBrush. This is where our axe high left off, and it was a couple separate chunks. So I might want to do a similar treatment here, where I just do a modify, convert, smooth mesh preview to polygons, and just repeat that across the board here. And once again, the reason I'm doing that is when you get into ZBrush, its subdivisions like to move the vertex position, which isn't really ideal. So something like that works though, and I'll just go ahead and hit Shift-P and Control-G on this for axe. And then as far as the axe low and all that stuff goes, we are going to want to keep that, so I am going to save this as a new file, save scene as. We'll go ahead and just make this our blockout 04, because we're going to want to come back to that axe later. And just to clear things out, you could do a file optimize scene size here to get rid of any nodes that you don't want and just basically cut the place. Now, what I want to send to ZBrush is probably this guy and the axe, and I'm going to keep the axe on the center axes. We can just manage our file in there and not really run into any issues. Now, what's going to be the purpose of ZBrush? The purpose is going to be to get some of this texture onto the surface. You can see how these aren't perfectly round. They look hammered. The horn has some details here. And things like the axe here, you know, wear away at the edges, maybe put little chips in it, that type of stuff. In which case, if we do put chips in it, we'll probably need to come back and redo to the topology for the game mesh, but that is totally normal. So, you know, areas I think could be cleaned up on this guy are the hands. Something about him just feels a little bit odd. I'm not really used to doing characters with 3 fingers, which might just be the issue, but we'll clean those up a bit and yeah, get the forms looking nicer. So I'm just going to highlight all of these guys in a cluster here. We're going to do an export selection, and I'm going to export these into a new folder here under scenes called ZBrush. Usually I like to have a sculpt file, and here we're going to switch this to the OBJ format, so it's nice and light. We don't need all the extra stuff. You can leave this stuff on if you want. We don't really need material groups, paint groups. Smoothing and normals are sometimes nice to have so they don't get flipped, which is another story. We probably want to check our normals on this, but I think it'll be okay. And we'll just make this our axe_hero. And we'll just name this base and export selection. So once again, I'm just taking the high poly assets and bringing them over. So once we have that set up, we're ready to go and ready to hop over into ZBrush. So I'll go ahead and launch this. As a disclaimer, you'll notice I'm using ZBrush 2022. I haven't exactly upgraded to the Maxon version. I'm still using the Pixelogic version. For those of you who are newer to this field, you might be like, hey, what's that? For the longest time, ZBrush had a license that you purchased and you had for life. They got bought by Maxon, and now it's part of a subscription fee. So I actually bought this way back in like 2009, probably, and I've had it ever since. So it's a terrible business model, but amazing for artists, which is all I really care about. So hopefully it hasn't changed too much in terms of the user interface. There's a couple things I like to do starting out in here. I do like to come to my document and set my range down to 0. That way that's taken care of. And then under the preferences, the quick save options here, I like to just crank up all the way in terms of maximum duration and restoration. That way it doesn't bug on me. Now, if you haven't brought in OBJs before, you can do it through the import options over here. And this will open up our import menu, and we can go ahead and import our OBJ file. So I'll go ahead and navigate to our folder location, which is on my desktop. and we're going to go to Scenes, into ZBrush here, and just grab our hero base and hit Open. And we can drag this into here and click Edit to get started on this. Now, the first thing I want to do is organize this. And if we take a look at this guy in terms of his layout, we blocked him into these separate chunks, and we're going to separate him into these separate chunks and organize them so we can work on it symmetrically as we see fit, or work on a single and mirror it over, whatever we want to do. Now, that's going to be achieved through the split option here, if you're not familiar with this in ZBrush. So coming down here to split, we can split these to parts. You can select to similar parts, and sometimes this does a good job. I do find we usually have to split 2 parts, but if we go ahead and hit split to similar, we can click OK. You'll notice it's an undoable action, and it's going to separate this guy out into separate tools, which is exactly what we want. Certain things that kept together, so those are our kneecaps, that's perfect. Here's our torso, we have our axe head. It looks like this kept something with the belt, so this is kind of silly. We can come to this one and we can just split to parts on this individually, so we can split that up. Notice I use the solo down here to check that. I also might want to keep the axe parts with the axe parts, so I'm just going to move the axe parts to the top here as I find them. And we'll just scroll down the list here to just keep checking. So that's our arms, that's our belt. There's a whole nother copy to the axe in here, so it looks like I brought in the low poly game axe on accident, and I can confirm that because of the wireframe. We can just click delete, we don't need that. Totally fine. Looks like it kept the shoulders together, so did a good job there. Here's the pants. This is our interior head cavity, which honestly probably doesn't need much work. Our boots are together. The base of the axe is down here. Let's go ahead and bring it up to here. And then lastly, we have our hands and our horns. So it looks like it did a very good job organizing these. Now, we can also group these. So for example, if I come up here to the axe, and let me alt-click on this to find where this is in the stack. Okay, very top. We can go ahead and create a group in here by creating a new folder. I'll go ahead and name this axe. And then in the axe here, I can just drag in the various axe elements, and this will help me stay organized and make it so I know which one's the axe, which one's not, and you can see I can collapse that. And then we can create a new folder here as well, and we'll just name this hero. And in the hero folder, I accidentally had the axe selected, so I'm going to have to move the axe elements back to the axe folder here. Oops, it definitely helps to have selected the things you want to put into folders. And the point of these folders is to kind of save us some time. Hero base. Looks like I lost my hero folder. Let me just try this again. There we go. So make sure you have the right thing selected. And maybe we want to not have these be right on top of each other. Did that actually go into there? Base. All right. So I'll have to be kind of careful organizing these. But take some time, organize your folders so that you have the right things in them, and you have your hero in one folder, axe in another, if you want. You don't need to, but I do find this is a bit easier if we're working one to another, back and forth. That way we stay organized. And the other important thing is we can toggle the visibility of these on and off, which is important. You can see the visibility toggles right now are off. I actually need to figure that out. Looks like it turned off all the visibilities for everything here. I want to be toggling those and off as needed. I still haven't quite grasped, after all these years, I've been using ZBrush now for almost 2 decades, and some of the stuff in here still is quite strange. It'd be interesting to use the max on. I think some of this stuff probably is easier in there. But anyways, there we go. We have this set up. We have our character in here. We're ready to kind of start the sculpting process. So from here, I'm just going to save this, and we're going to save this into our scenes here. We'll just go ahead and make this our hero, high poly detailing, and save that out. And we can dive in and get started. So we have to think about how we want to kind of approach this. Usually what I like to do is kind of start with a base piece and then kind of work our way out. The head is kind of a good place to start because it's a super important area and it's going to kind of set the tone for things. We also want to get a read on, what level of detail we want to have. And this is up to you. You can go this route where we have something really dinged up and beat up like this character is. Lots of character, or something a little bit cleaner like this with a little bit of surface texture. Just kind of depends. I think I'm going to go for something in between these, probably something a bit more like that, just to add some surface detail to this, but still keep a nice clean form. So when we move into our texturing pass, we have something to look at and a distinctive style to our game. So let's get started here with the head and talk about the process we're going to do here. One of the first things I like to do is subdivide this to be at the point of smoothness so we can start working, and then kind of convert it to a state where we can sculpt and we can edit the surface here without needing to change the form. To start that off, what I like to do is store a morph target for this. If you come down here to morph target, you can click store morph target. And what that allows you to do is switch between this at any time. Now, the reason why it's good to do that is under the geometry tab, when we start to click divide, it can change the base form. In this instance, it's not going to because we have such a high poly already. But if I were to come in here now, come back to the morph target, you can see I could click switch and you'll see there's a slight change there. And what that's going to do is it's going to help hold our forms a little bit more as we subdivide up here. So you can decide how many you need here. 1 million is probably more than enough for the helm by itself, and that'll give us a nice start point. Now, one issue too with this though is that we do have varying density due to our edge loops inside of Maya. So what I like to do to get a nice neutral base to sculpt and detail on is I actually like to come down here to Dynamesh after subdividing and just go pretty high on this. It's relative to the scale of the scene, so you might have to do some experimenting. You'll see up there we're at 1 million. So I could try something like a 1024 resolution, do a Dynamesh here. Don't freeze the subdivisions because we actually are fine with getting rid of those, and see how it holds up. So this is at 500. I'm going to want more detail than that. So what I'll do is I'll hit Control-Z to undo, instead go to 2048 and then Dynamesh and hit no. And the idea here is this is going to give us a nice base with even quads to work on for detailing. And you can see how that looks there. Now, in terms of this, I probably don't need another subdivision, so I can just work on this layer. I can even turn off Dynamesh. And what I'm doing here is I'm simply using ZBrush as a means of retopologizing this to turn it into something extremely usable for what I need to do next, which is this detailing pass. Now, with Solo turned on, we can isolate this, and we can come over here into layers, and we can just add a new layer. And I'll go ahead and just name this layer by coming down here to names, probably like our base wear, for the wear and tear, and make sure that's turned on. And we can start doing a treatment here where we sculpt on this. Now, I am going to do this symmetrically to save time, and because we're probably going to have symmetrical UVs. I'm going to switch over to the clay buildup, BCB, and I'm going to set my intensity really low, around 5. And I'm just going to come in here now, and I'm going to start kind of scratching up the surface for the purpose of having a base to make some details on. So you can go negative, you can go positive. The goal here is to go very lightly kind of across the surface to get an uneven look, and what I'm trying to go for is like battle-worn metal that maybe isn't too grizzled, but it's not brand new. The other thing is this kind of helps it look man-made, you know, hammered by a human as opposed to perfectly machined. And it's just kind of a nice touch you can do to get a decent look to these things. Now, I am going to do this on a piece-by-piece basis. Now, you know, that means I'm going to do this on the helmet, the shoulders, so on and so forth. But it also means I'm going to do it based on the sections of the helmet. So this is going to be for the helm part, and I'm going to use these layers for this helm part, but I'm probably going to do a separate pass for the other areas. That just kind of keeps it clean and a little bit easier to work with. I could, however, attach it all to the same layer. It just kind of depends, right? But the catch is if you get it looking good on one and not another, it can be kind of nice to have them separated. Let's go ahead and combine them, though, for this one, I think. I think we can probably get away with it. And what I'll do is just make my brush a bit smaller here and just come along here and do some different directions to kind of indicate different angles of wear and tear. And try not to be too symmetrical and obvious in the center line area. For example, on this area, I might try and use a lot of crisscross zigzags. And just remember, I'm holding Alt sometimes to dig in. I'm letting it go sometimes so we get an area sticking out. And since I have 5 opacity here and I'm using a Wacom pen, what I'm getting is just a very subtle surface detailing that's going to help break up the specular. Now, I am using the default material in here. You can switch around a lot, so we will talk about materials momentarily. This was kind of just me being in a hurry, because right now I'm making these videos before I work, and I don't have a lot of time. So trying to get some quality education out there for you guys. But I would potentially play around with some different materials in terms of setup, but you really don't need to. And this default one's really nice for an initial read of just how these things are going to go. It kind of has a terracotta like pot feel to it, but that's okay. So take your time with it. I am doing the base here. Really kind of focus on anything that you will see that's important, anything that you're going to visually see. And, you know, these interior lips too are definitely something to consider. I'm going to take a little bit less time with them just because they aren't going to be that scene. But this will be kind of our initial pass here, kind of wearing this up. Now, I also want to mention, you're probably thinking, hey, this is all cool and all, but this doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a dinged up metal surface. And you are correct. What we're doing is we're kind of prepping the surface for this. So just be mindful of that. I'm getting a little bit here in the lip. I don't think I'm going to do the whole thing. This is where turning off solo can be kind of helpful. You'll notice to right about there, you know, is where we need to go. That's probably our highest point, so I'll just get some on the inside here to kind of give some wear and tear to the interior so nothing's perfectly smooth, and this will give us a nice look. Now, this brings up an interesting point. I had a student ask a bit about an anvil and how I would approach an anvil in 3D, and what I showed them is basically creating a very basic low poly blockout, bringing it straight into ZBrush, and then just banging it up and making it look super real. Because perfect topology is great and all, but almost nothing looks perfect in the real world. It depends on the style of game, you know, style of film, whatever you're going for. Obviously, a brand new manufactured anvil is probably going to look nice and pretty, but generally speaking, the answer is everything is beat up in this world. And the beat up gives it a bit more character too, which is important to be aware of. So now that we have this kind of base wear going on these lines, I'm going to take the next step, which is using the flatten brush. So I'm going to switch to BFA, and I'm actually going to set the intensity to 100 here. And what we're going to do is we're going to flatten this out. Now, I usually like to switch over to something like a matte cap white to really see this. You could also switch to a base material, which we will in a bit. The base material is closest to how this is actually going to look. So once you get this into a game or into you know, Maya with shading, this is pretty darn close. But if I come into the matte cap white here, this lets me see what I'm doing a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is just take this flatten, and I'm going to make little circles, and I'm going to lift up my brush frequently, going over these to make this hammering effect. And we're just going to do this across the whole model. I'm going to just do this part in a speed run, but I'll go ahead and fast forward through it, and I'll keep the visuals here so you can watch me. But once again, I'm just going in little circles like you would brush your teeth, and picking up my brush every now and then and moving it. And what this does is it creates a hammered metal effect, where it looks like this has been hammered in terms of the detailing. So from here forward, I'm going to just let this go to silence and speed through it. So the end product should look something like this, where you get a nice hammered looking metal, and you can vary the size of your brush to get different results, but that's going to give me kind of the base wear on the helmet. And to show how this is basically going to look is if we come over here to like a basic material, it's just going to pick up specular highlights kind of like that. It's going to look nice and dented, so that way, you know, when our character's there, he looks a little bit tougher. Now, for this next area, we're going to repeat this process. I'm going to come back to matte cap white. And on this one, I'm just going to go with a smaller brush with the same technique, kind of going in circles again. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at that. So I'll just come in here, and we'll just start working this. Now, this area, you have to be careful as you get close to the edges, but same deal, you know, just kind of coming in here and working your little circles. And the goal is to get rid of all these scratchy details. These scratchy details, if you're wondering what they're there for, they kind of help break up the surface. So as we're using the flatten brush, we get a result, right? If we just kind of flatten on the surface, you might get something similar to this, but that height variation, the indentations, they just give us nice different little angles that make these brushes work well. And you can see how that looks there. All right. Now we are also going to do an edge pass, and as you're looking at this, you know, if you find these on the side, feel free to jump down here and just kind of noodle them in circles again. We'll be back up to the top soon, so I think I saw some up there that we can work at And we can just come in here and do this. Now, I like to do the surfacing approach manually a lot of the times. You can do this in something like Substance Painter. It really depends on the kind of hurry I'm in, the level of detail I want to get. For a personal project or a hero asset, I do like to do it this way as much as I can. And honestly, it doesn't take too long usually. So it kind of varies, but we do have a lot of assets on this character, and this character is relatively simple. So, with super complex characters, we might take a different approach. The other thing I want to call out is my use of layers here. I'm using layers intentionally in this workflow, and I should talk about that before we move forward. Part of it is because of working with art directors. So a lot of the times art directors will love what you do, or they'll hate what you do, and then you gotta go and do it. And undoing surface detail like this, it's not really possible. You have to start over. So having this organized in layers allows you to toggle these on and off if the art directors decide, hey, no, we don't want it to look beat up, or hey, we want it to look beat up in a different way. So just kind of be mindful of that. That's one of the reasons I am using them specifically. All right, I'm just gonna get in here and hit up that area a little bit there with these smaller ones. And then this area, I'm just gonna hit up a little bit more too. And then we'll work on this center line now. And for this one, I might make it a little bit bigger. The reason why is because this area is kind of nice and big and flat, and we're going right down the symmetry line. So I don't want the patterns to be too small and noticeable. These should look like some pretty big hammer hits is the idea. And just kind of working in those little circles as much as possible to break up this surface, make it less even, and make it look nice and battle-worn is our end goal. So for quite a few pieces, we're going to be able to just take this approach where we come in and do the surface detail. There are a couple areas that I actually do want to do some sculpting on, like the boots and the hands, so I'm going to address those probably next. But the same approach here we can use for all the metal surfaces to just get a nice worn, beat up look. All right, so something like that, it kind of finishes out those sides. Some of these are pretty noticeable, like these areas here I might want to come in and play around with. I also might want to adjust those when I do the edges instead, because a lot of the times what's happening here is we're just so close to an edge that it's sinking in. The other thing I want to mention is that this shader is making these a bit more dramatic. This is the drama queen shader, the matte cap white. When we switch over here to the basic material, you'll see those don't stand out quite as much. They still do quite a bit, but not as much. All right, going back to the matte cap white, let's turn this on. And what I'm gonna do now is create a new layer here, and we're just gonna make this our edge wear. And for this one, we're gonna come along the edges and wear them down as the layer entails. So that's going to be largely on these areas, coming on the sides. I'm not going to worry about this like thin area here. I also might want to double check. I forgot the interior here. So let's go ahead and backpedal here. I'll go ahead and just turn on this layer again, and just make sure you get all the surfaces. Sometimes I forget these interior ones when working, so that's why I was like, hey, wait a minute, I think we're forgetting something. So just kind of getting these in here. I'll do a quick pass on this so it's not quite as tidy. These areas, we're not going to see as much, so it's okay if it's not quite as precise. I also want to call out, I did do the interior of the helmet, if you caught that in the time lapse. Not just the exterior. We haven't looked at that, but anywhere that's possibly going to be seen, I like to get that detail pass on. It helps. You always want to stay consistent as much as possible, and missing a small area like that, it will stand out, which is important to be aware of. A lot of the times stuff like that sneaks into games due to time constraints, leads just not wanting to deal with it. That's another factor. Sometimes it's just not worth the fight to try and get that edited. Okay, cool. Now we can come back to our edge wear here. With the edge wear, we're going to take the same approach with the flatten brush, but we're going to go kind of at an angle here, and not too big, not too small. We're going to come along here and basically just drag and beat up the edges. And I like to beat up all the edges on, surfaces like this that are war-torn and hammered and imperfect. This is going to catch the light nicely, and it's going to give it a lot more variety than just kind of our base bevel that we get out of something like Maya. Once again, this is great for things like armor, old stuff. I wouldn't use this for something newer. If I was doing like a sci-fi thing, for example, or, a situation where maybe these were helmets used in battles that had guns, not physical stuff, I might just use the nice, perfect edges out of Maya. But I like to come in here and kind of give this nice gritty look inside of ZBrush. And this is something I find you can't really create easily in an application like Substance Painter, at least not in a precise way. You can kind of fake edge wear in there, and I do that for props every now and then, but when you have a nice stylized piece like this, you might as well take time to come in here and manually bevel those out. So you can see how those edges are going to catch with some variety there, with some grit. And if we go ahead and switch over here to the base material, you can see how that's going to look nice and beat up. That's our goal. So now we just need to repeat this literally everywhere. Fun part. So let's go ahead and come in here. Same thing. I'm going to start with this line here and try and transition 90 degrees. It can be a little bit challenging. This is why I wasn't too worried about those areas that were like super close to the edge, because this is going to kind of push things away and kind of give it some variety. But let's go ahead and get this whole area squared in here so we don't forget these interior ones as well. Just get that nice beat up look. If you're familiar with transparencies, because this doesn't have subdivisions, we can actually come in here and use those. So I'm going to use this to get inside here. And that's just using Control-Shift and Alt to access this area. We then Control-Shift-Alt tap out to exit. And now I might want to do this for the visor area. Just Control-Shift-Alt. And maybe just grab this area in general down here so we can see more of it. I might Control-Shift-Alt the backside here to remove. That way we can work this a little bit easier. Like I mentioned, I think I mentioned this earlier, this isn't really a how-to video, this is a process video, so it's kind of expected you're an intermediate to advanced user of some of these tools to get the most out of it. Just a heads up for those of you who might be joining us in this video and not previously. So there are more videos in this series as well, before and after this, for those of you who are just tuning in. All right, let's go ahead and do it across here. I might make my brush a smidge bigger for this just to speed things along, but same deal. I'm just running along this. And the idea is what this is doing is it's creating a bevel. It sounds weird, but a bevel is basically just at a cut at a degree angle. So this flattening process at this degree angle is going to essentially count as a bevel. Just it's much more organic than what we get out of an application like Maya, where you have those perfect machined bevels that don't have any flaws to them. And once again, the goal is to make this a little bit more worn-torn looking and give it a bit more story. You would not use this on everything, but it'll make it more interesting if you do. All right, cool. So I think that gives us all of the side bevels there in terms of what I want. I'm not going to worry about those edges kind of bumping up to there. They're not visible enough to care. These ones, however, I will up top. This one's a little bit trickier because these are so thin. I'm going to have to be kind of careful here. Use a very small brush. I don't want to lose the elevation here if possible. And it's okay to kind of keep some of the perfect edges on this one. If they don't give, that'll create some variety. But I do want to get a little bit of a bevel here. Kind of just beat that line down to make everything consistent in terms of the amount of wear this has. And we will be repeating this process across all the metals on this guy, so just be mindful of that. And there we go. All right, so something like that's going to essentially finish our detailing pass on the helmet here. And if we go ahead and turn this on, you can see the effect that's going to have in terms of just dinging this up, giving it some texture. And remember, we're going to see it from a distance, so it's not going to be that tight. And you can see how that contrasts compared to everything else now, where it just has a little bit more story to it in terms of the wear and tear, and it's going to give us a nice look in terms of our end goal. So let's go ahead and take a look at this process elsewhere. There's a few different metal areas that we could tackle. We obviously have the rings around the hand. If we go ahead and take a look at this, we have the shoulders, the buckle, the kneecap, maybe even the horns. You know, it's kind of interesting. This horn actually has that ring. I think all these ones actually have a ring on it. So we can actually add that in here as well in the sculpting pass. This one didn't, so we have to decide if we like that. Maybe. I kind of like the idea of a ring. That might be something we could play around with here or even inside of Maya again and re-import. But we could go ahead and handle some of these other areas like the shoulders, buckle, knees, even the axe with a similar approach to what we've done here. Some of the cloth stuff, leather stuff, we're going to spend a bit more time on, so let's just be mindful of that. But at this stage, since we've gone through this technique, it'd be a good idea to repeat the process elsewhere just to kind of make sure everything's looking consistent and we're taking the same approach. So let's go ahead and move on to something like the shoulders next. Just kind of to recap, the same approach here. I'll come down here to the morph target. We'll just go ahead and store this. We'll come into our geometry, divide this about 3 times, go to the lower version, come in here to the morph target and just switch. That will maintain its volume. Then probably divide this up to be around 1 million again. Then we can just do our Dynamesh. So we decided 2048 was good for the helm. We could try that again here. Just Dynamesh that down. We want to maintain around the 1 million marker. So that's pretty close. We could decide if we want to go higher or lower than that. The helmet is substantially more polys, so this will probably be okay for these. So I'll just leave it here. We'll go ahead and turn off Dynamesh so we don't accidentally remesh. Come down to our layers, and we'll just go ahead and name this our base wear again. And this time, we'll just go through the exact same process. So I'll go ahead and hit BCB to get to my clay buildup here. And make sure your symmetry is turned on for sure on these, because they go across. We have 2 separate ones. If we want some variety, if they're the same front and back, which I think these are, you can actually mirror them after the fact too, which can be kind of useful. I am noticing we might not have enough polygons here on this edge to really hold up. So I am going to backtrack a bit. I'm going to go back and just show you this transition. You can see how that is at 1.8 mil, right? So I'll just go ahead and go 4096 on the Dynamesh here, and it'll be a bit higher, but this should put us around 2 mil, 3 mil. But you'll see how those are a lot cleaner. So we're just going to go with that. I could probably have done 3K, but whatever. Usually we go in 4s. So let's come back here to our base wear and yeah, just get to work here. So same deal with the clay buildup. I'll just kind of come in here, scratch in some details and the negative, scratch in some on the positive, and just go through the process here of kind of beating this up and giving it a bit of a story, just like we did the helmet, to prep it for the detailing pass using the flat brush. Symmetry still turned on, good. I wanted to double check that because I did do an undo. Now, the other thing to think about when you're doing something like a shoulder here is, you know, why did we not have enough topology? It was because it was that number divided by 2. So we didn't have 900,000 verts on this. We had 450. And that's because there's 450 on each shoulder. So at 3 mil right now, we really have about 1.5 each on these. And at least half of that are coming in here. Now I am noticing I didn't add a bevel to the interior of this, which is my bad. I don't think it matters. We're not going to see this, and I think it's kind of nice if this has a nice rounded look anyway. It is going to be a little bit harder to kind of define where the gold ends and begins, but that's not something our concept gives us anyway. So I'm going to commit to this. Normally, I would probably back out and I would fix that, just so everyone knows, for the sake of like a professional project. What's nice is in the final presentation, no one's going to see that, which is funny. That's where it's like you really have to kind of think about the time something's going to take as well. So I'm moving on to these now with kind of a smaller brush, just kind of marking these up and doing the same sort of process here. I don't really have a method to my madness. I do add a lot of variation, which I want to call out. I don't just keep going the same direction forever. And, you know, the idea is to kind of think about how the tools would have been used to make this. what kind of angles might have been used. The other thing is just deflections in combat, right? So part of the story we're telling is how it's built. Another part is how it's been used. And chaos, is probably the best thing to say. This isn't finely machined. It's hammered. It's banged out. It's maybe even crudely made, depending on the context of the war. If it's a world riddled by demons and stuff, and they're trying to fight back the Dark Lord or something like that, they're probably not going to have a lot of time to worry about good craftsmanship. It's more like, I gotta feed my kids tonight. The hunter came in. This is the only meat that's going to be in town for a week. Buy my armor. I made this. So, hard to say. But then, regardless of combat, combat says a lot. You could still do this with like machining too. For example, if it was manufactured a certain way, you could use this to get direct striations. So there's a lot of different approaches. Really depends on the type of object you're making. But since we're making armor here, we'll do it somewhat chaotic. So I'm just going to add a bit more in here, and we're just going to switch back over to the flat brush, BFA, to get to that with the hotkey, at least in this version of ZBrush. And I'm just going to come in here and go in my little circles here to hammer this out and get this to look nice. I do need to be careful going to the edges there. You'll notice I kind of take my time there. I also tend to brush a little bit softer so the alpha doesn't go all the way. Sometimes I will also reduce my size. Also notice in these areas I'm kind of going bigger and harder. This creates some surface variety, and this is one of those things that you can't really get nicely in something like Substance Painter. It takes a lot of work to get this to have this kind of variety in Substance Painter. And what's interesting is this variety kind of matches the real world. So if you think about it, if I was trying to maintain that edge in the real world, I'm going to do a lot smaller taps with my hammer around these areas, probably with my hand on the other side. So they're not even going to be quite as indented. Those areas are going to tend to be a little bit finer. The other thing is those are the areas that are less likely to be hit by a weapon because they're kind of further back and down. They're not the broad surfaces, so they're likely not getting striked by anything. You could also play around with like adding in large dashes here. If you're going to do an asymmetrical UV set, it can be a nice way to kind of add detail to your character. I'm not. So I don't want any of that because it'd be too distinctive. I'm going to come in here with a little bit larger brush on some of these just to kind of flatten the areas more so we're not getting too much noise. I like the big chunky hammer looks for this guy. I'm going to repeat this process on the inside with a large brush. Once again, this is an area we're not going to see. It's also an opportunity here for me to kind of push this side to be a side, an edge, since I have something very rounded. So there's actually quite a few brushes I can use to achieve that, but I'll go kind of aggressive in here for now. I might regret that. We'll see. Famous last words. I can always go smaller with this too, once I have these large ones in here, and kind of nudge this in. I don't think we're really going to see these anyway, and we can kind of confirm this looking at the character. Yeah, we're not going to see the interior there. So really it probably matters most what we have around these areas here. Kind of towards the lip, and ultimately we'll add edgeware to those to make it look nice and soft, so it's kind of receding back into this chaos, but something like that. And then just like we did previously on these areas, we can go a bit smaller. I am not liking some of these bubbles here, so I'm going to hammer those out. And then my brush can go substantially smaller for all of this. You can notice I nixed that area there. I'm going to leave it as kind of a damage mark. It's probably a good spot anyway, since it's... Actually, that's not a very good spot. But, hey, let's just go with it. Might be one of those areas where I undo and try and find the issue with, but to keep things moving forward. Alright, so we're just going to continue this across here. I'll probably go ahead and go through this, time-lapse it for you, so I'm not talking the whole time, but smaller little circles, and hammer out the metal. Alright, cool. So that gives us kind of a beat-up hammered look. We can repeat this process on these areas here before we get into the edges. So let's go ahead and tackle this bottom side. And just be mindful of the hole as you're doing this, you know, how it's looking on the other sides, that you're not having a huge impact elsewhere. And once again, just small circles is a good way to go if you're just doing armor beat up here with the flat brush. And knowing how to do different materials is kind of a pretty big factor with sculpting. You know, how you approach it, how you treat it, the finish, it all kind of varies. So it's nice being able to create something, you know, by hand, control over the variety and the results. That inner lip, I'm still not a big fan of. We're going to have to play around with that when we get to edges. But we'll commit to it for now, and if it's a problem later, we can try and solve for it. But for now, let's just focus on getting a end product out of here. All right, cool. So something like that gives us a nice finish. If we go ahead and compare this to the helmet, you can see they're looking pretty nice together. Come in here to our base material, similar D-up. But let's go ahead and proceed to do the edges just like we did previously. I'll go ahead and create a new layer here. We'll just make this our edges. And we can come in and start doing that same way, where we just come in with a nice small brush here and just kind of noodle this in and wear this down so we don't have these perfect bevels, and we get some nice little ledges to catch our detail on when it comes to our normal map projections. All right, cool. So that one's nice and beat up. Let's go and do this outside. I'm going to do this one a bit bigger since it's kind of a bigger bevel here and not as fine. And we'll do a similar thing on the inner lip to kind of help bring that together. With these, you know, we kind of want a good center flatness to it to kind of show that bevel idea. I'm not zigzagging across this. I'm trying to maintain the form, and I guess it's probably a good point. I didn't really talk about how I'm doing this. I'm not going in circles in here. I'm going in a series of straightish lines. I say straightish because they're not perfectly straight. I'm also, you know, striking more than once usually. That's kind of a personal preference that comes from being like a sketchy style artist. So you might be able to get a more precise look by just dragging. But something like that gives me an okay look. A lot of wear there, but that's okay. And then on this inside here, I might go more aggressive with my bevel size since I don't actually have this kind of baked in. I don't want this to appear super soft and muddy. So this is kind of an opportunity here to completely change the form in terms of how it's reading. And adding a more aggressive bevel here is probably okay because it's on the interior. It'll help kind of turn it away from the light faster, which is nice, so we don't need to worry about bloody details in the background getting picked up. And just kind of give it that crisper form that we might be missing on that area there. That should be okay in terms of that, and give us an okay result. The other thing too is this kind of is golden, and that's not golden. At this stage, if I wanted to, I could maybe add another layer here, and we could play around with this idea of cutting something in here using a brush like the BDS for Damn Standard, and trying to make a differentiation between these areas. I don't think I'm going to, though, just for the sake of simplicity. I think I'm just going to let this roll into gold, and then we'll just kind of put some artificial shading in there. But something like that's going to give us an okay result. You could come in here as well, and you could flatten out any of these areas that stand out. So this area here, for example, and I think I missed this edge because it doesn't look like this had the treatment at all for flattening. So I'm going to come in here and just kind of come across this edge and connect it into here. It looks like I missed that area. Just double check I didn't miss any other areas. I think that was the main one. But that should bring this into consistency with our helmet here. And now those two metal should read. So the next area to kind of get to is going to be the kneecaps down there. Let me save though. And then we can get to the knees and maybe the belt buckle. And then we're going to have to start doing a little bit more bespoke sculpting on things like the cloth. Kneecaps here, same process that we've been doing. So I can come in here, we can just come to our geometry, divide this up. And for this one, I didn't give it a base, which is probably fine. These are so divided, I don't think we're going to lose a whole lot of volume on these, just in terms of their placement there. So 3.5 mil, that's fine. Dynamesh here, these ones really don't have a whole lot. They don't have an interior or an exterior, so let's try 2048. Remember, it is whatever this number is divided by 2. That's definitely too low at 200,000. So I'll just crank this to 4096. You can't currently go higher than 4096 here, so this is going to be what it is. We don't get more than this. So, hey, look, 400 per. I'll take it. That's not too bad, considering there's not a whole lot of detail on these. And like I mentioned, the whole purpose of this is just to make nice, even quads for this detailing process. So we'll go ahead and turn off that. And if you wanted more, you could divide. We really don't need it, though. And we'll just repeat the process here. So at this point, you already know the approach we're going to take. We're just going to come in here with the clay buildup, make sure your symmetry is turned on, and just kind of start scratching away here at these, giving them, you know, a bit of directionality. And you can do this bigger or smaller. I'm kind of doing it bigger right now to get through it. Normally I'd want to try and be consistent if possible across the pieces, but this doesn't tend to show up too much, so I'm not too worried about it. What's nice about these kneecaps is we did keep these somewhat rounded, so we don't need to worry about an edge pass here. It's mainly just going to be, hey, let's beat this thing up and, you know, get it to look like it's a bit more worn-torn. Because this is a knee pad too, we could consider going a little bit more gentle on the inside, but since this process kind of represents making it and the damage, I'm going to go ahead and put it on both. Now, when it comes to the damage itself, we might add in more damage using something like Substance Painter in the term of scratches, dirt, grunge, corrosion. Those are all things Substance Painter is great at, but when it comes to altering form, ZBrush is going to be kind of the go-to. All right, so let's go ahead and use the flatten here. Same deal. I might make my brush a little bit bigger here, and I'm going to start from the center outward and just kind of give nice little angles here. And this is going to make the kneecaps substantially more visually interesting instead of just looking like a potato or a loaf of bread or a mochi. This is going to give them, you know, more of that visual interest in terms of like a metal type material. And I may need to vary my size here towards the sides. This is okay though. It's going to kind of give us a distinctive look at where this transitions. I do need to be careful on the sides themselves that I don't alter the silhouette substantially with the flat brush. On our other object, it wasn't as big of a deal, but on this one it just might be. So I'll come into the backside here and just kind of noodle my way out again with this, doing little circles. And now coming into this edge area here, I'm going to make this a bit smaller. Maybe not. But we'll just kind of do a similar approach here, trying to move in circles if we can. It's a little bit hard on some of these areas. And maybe flattening out some ridges, but I do want to show you that's going to start to distort the silhouette a bit. So we do need to be careful there, that we're not going super aggressive with this flatten, but we are using it enough to kind of remove that detail we added in and give a story to this in terms of how it's being made. We might have to do multiple passes though, just to kind of make sure we're maintaining the form here a little bit nicer. And in retrospect, it might have been good to start with this area and then kind of build from here rather than the opposite direction. That allows us to kind of spot any major errors with it earlier on, but something like that can kind of work. You'll see it has some shape variance now. I'm going to go and kind of shape this a little bit more on these sides here. Just come around here and define the edge a bit more on these. And I might actually restart the kneecaps now that I'm looking at it. I don't know. That looks okay. I think that kind of fits our style and our look. We might come in and edit those a bit more, but yeah, I think that's decent. I can kind of come back in a row here as well. Like I mentioned, the outside hammer look we probably want to keep, but when it comes to these areas here, we might want something a little bit more mechanical, and that's where using something like this can be kind of nice. A large flat brush like this can give us a decent look. I think I'm going to go with my smaller ones though, kind of multifaceted. I think that'll look okay and kind of match the style in terms of this. All right, so let's go ahead and just take a look at that in the base material. You can see our metals are looking pretty good. The one last area we have is the belt buckle here, so we can go ahead and do a similar treatment to this, just like we did with the others, to kind of keep it looking a little bit dinged up. And then I think the rest of the areas we're going to need a more bespoke approach for. But let's go ahead and take this here and give it a similar little treatment where we come in and we ding it up a little bit. This one I might want to go a little bit less aggressive on because it's not necessarily armor. So something to be aware of. But still have the same treatment with the edges and all that kind of stuff. So let's go to geometry. We'll go ahead and divide this up. So we have a decent amount, so 500 should be fine there. And then under Dynamesh, I'll just do a similar approach that we've been doing. Set this to about 2048. Dynamesh this, so that way we get our nice resolution. 2048 might be a little bit too low, so I'm going to go to 4096. Dynamesh that. Still really low, but around the same amount we had, so that should be fine. And we can determine if we actually need more than that or not. And if we do, all you need to do is come up here and hit divide. And if we go ahead and do that, you'll see 1.6 mil. That should be over enough. We can now come into our layer panel, add in a layer here, and begin the process. Now, with this one, you can decide if you want symmetry or not. This ultimately comes down to how you're going to UV it. If you're going to UV this as a single piece, or if you're going to cut it down the middle. Now, it also depends on how we do the topology. If we keep this a separate piece, we're not necessarily going to split it. But if we combine it with the character's mesh, we might split it. So, really kind of depends here how we're ultimately going to approach that in the game mesh. In the instance of this, I think we might combine it with the body, so I can show you how to do super low poly stuff, in which case that means let's go ahead and stick with symmetry. So we'll just go ahead and turn on X here, and same process that we've been doing. I have my Z intensity down to 5. Let's go ahead and get this in here, and adjust these details in, and get our form looking nice. Now, we don't really need to do the backside, so you can decide to if you want. I like to just to be consistent. I think it's a good practice to get every angle. And it also might remind you to do other important steps like the inside. The inside's easy to forget. I kind of forgot it on the helmet, so let's do it here. Make sure we get it on this belt buckle. All right, so let's go ahead and switch to our flatten here. We'll just go to BFA here and just kind of roll these around. Notice I'm not getting my results. That's because I restarted ZBrush. If you restart ZBrush, it resets your brush settings. I use everything at default. Some of you might be wondering why. I do get that question sometimes. It's because I'm a teacher. I'm usually teaching a range of students from advanced to beginner. Because of that, I've kind of gotten into the habit of not really creating custom user interfaces, adjusting presets, any of that type of stuff. I do it on an as-need basis, generally speaking, rather than, permanently having a special workspace with special layouts and all that kind of stuff. I don't find it inhibits my productivity at all. If anything, it helps because of how often computers crash or how often you might find yourself on a foreign machine. I have seen more people crippled by presets than assisted. All right, so let's go ahead and continue through here. Same approach, just kind of hammering in here with our flatten brush. I'm coming in here and getting the interior this time, so that way we don't forget it. And leaving a little bit of space around the edges to kind of keep those stylized. I might go over some of the areas here that I might have missed. Let's get these nice and hammered in here. This interior face I'm not worrying too much about. I'm going a little bit quickly through there, because we have it if we need it. And that's kind of a good point, is sometimes we do need those things. We might decide at some point we need that. So something like that. Let's come into our layers though. We'll go ahead and make this kind of our base wear. And just as we've done before, we'll go ahead and make one for edge wear separate. That way we can dial these in, turn them on and off as needed. And come in here and adjust these edges. So I really left the edges kind of plain on this one. And I'm going to give these a pretty chunky bevel, just to kind of give it a nice graphic, cartoony look, especially since it's kind of the centerpiece in a way of the character where it's situated. So I'll just continue down these, making them somewhat straight. And for these ones, I'm not going to go quite as dinged up as I did on the armor. I might even give these a few extra strokes here to make them a little bit straighter, if anything, than the armor was, to kind of offset the idea of armor versus non-armor. It's still good to have some wear on these, though. If this guy's going into battle, you know, everything's going to consistently need to be kind of dented and damaged. And this is all exaggerated, which I also want to point out. Since it's a cartoony character, I am pushing the exaggeration on these quite a bit in terms of the edge wear. That's just par for the course with cartoons. So if I was doing something more realistic, I would probably still do a pass similar to this, but I'd be using a lot tighter bevels. Looks like that didn't quite get in. I did the interior, but not all of the interior. Go figure. So just make sure we kind of nudge out those details. And then let's get the interior here. Edge. Same situation. And kind of get it to match that beat up look for our character here. So let's take a look at that. There we go. There's our metals. The first pass at least done on these. And you can see, like I mentioned, it's just going to add a little bit of character, some ding up at the end of the day, surface imperfections. I might even come in here and try and smooth this out a little bit with this brush. So kind of going larger now that I have these all together, and just kind of nudging these down a little bit more evenly and less beat up on this. And I'm just using the flatten brush. I know I use the word smooth, the forbidden word, but I don't know, just going in straight lines here rather than circles so much to dial back some of that like hammering look. So it doesn't look quite as dinged up as the armor here. A little bit unevenness to make it match, but not super even to where it stands out as being completely off. And I'm going to play around with this bevel here that I have. I feel like it's not quite reading the way I want on this interior here. So, I don't know. That should be fine from a distance. So something like that, you know, give us some surface variation. All right, so we're going to call that on our first pass here of sculpting the detail. Getting in the shoulders here, getting in the helmet, the kneecaps, the various metals. I did run into some Wacom tablet issues here with these. I might want them to look a little bit different, but we'll leave them here. And the nice thing with these layers is if you don't like them, we could always just ixnay them, go back to the original. We could also dial these in. So for example, if I didn't want to have that much wear on these, I could set this to maybe like 0.5 or 0.75. And we can adjust this after the fact. Same goes with this one here, you know, with something like the base wear, maybe I want 0.5 on that. Maybe on the edges, I want something like 0.5. So just be mindful that you can dial these in later after the fact. I'm going to leave everything at 1 for now. And we'll go ahead and pause here to take a break, get a fresh set of eyes, and then come back in and start tackling some of the more detailed areas like the hands and feet later, where we might actually have to sculpt some form and not just detail. Make sure you save if you are following along. That way you have a spot to come back to, and we'll go ahead and give you some time to practice on those metals. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can catch the next video in the series when it goes live.